When I was a kid, I wanted to get an incubator. You know, this is a device for brooding eggs so they will hatch. And so I sent away for seeds to the American Seed Company. They would give you a box of seeds, and you would sell those seeds and then send the proceeds into the company, and then they would send you the item that you selected, and I selected an incubator. You would sell the seeds for probably a total of $15 to $20 for the whole box, and then you sent in the money. I found that the vegetable seeds back in the 70s sold better than the flower seeds. My dad discovered later, I think I was in high school, that that company went out of business, and he liked to follow commerce, business, and so forth, and he said it was because there was a change of culture among the kids that were selling the seeds, and he said they weren't sending the money back in, so the company closed. Just interesting how things changed. We had a friend, I got the Chickubator. It was called a Chickubator, and I think it only held 2, maybe 3 chicken eggs. It was that small. It looked like Saturn. It had a dome on the top and a ring around the middle. The dome was clear. It had a little thermometer. It had a little light bulb in there, a little plastic tray to hold water, and a grid above that to put the eggs. So it was easier to put quail eggs in there because you could fit more than chicken eggs. And there is a certain percentage that will hatch and those that will not. We had a friend in Chandler at the time. Chandler was very rural. There was a long partition between Tempe and Chandler where you would drive through desert and farmland before you would get to Chandler in those days. This friend had domesticated quail. He was raising domesticated quail, and he gave us some of those eggs. So we put them in the Chickubator to hatch, and you had to mark the eggs on both sides, an X on one side and an O on the other side, because you had to turn the eggs several times a day. I don't remember how many times. Just like the mama bird would if she were setting on the nest, she would, with her feet, roll the eggs over to warm them on one side and then the other. You had to have the right temperature in the Chickubator and the right moisture level, because if you didn't, there would be no hatch. 20 days, took about 20 days for the hatch, if I remember right. And the first time this happened, I believe it was in the middle of the night, and we got up because somebody heard something happening in the Chickubator. And we could hear cheeping, and we all gathered around, and you could hear the pecking sounds of the baby chick trying to emerge from the egg, trying to break out. And they would make this perfect circle with their beak on the inside of the egg in order to make a hatch to break out. And then when the chick emerged, it was wet and it would flop around. It didn't know how to walk yet, but within hours, it was dry and it walked just fine. The chick would break out. Some had trouble breaking out, and my mom said you couldn't help them. She grew up in a rural setting. Her father grew up on a farm, and so she grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota. She said you couldn't help them because if you did, they wouldn't make it. She was right. Whenever we would help one of the chicks emerge from the egg, you wouldn't make it. It was just really interesting how they made that circular exit and then pushed the shell out and emerged and stood there before you, new life. I was listening to Bishop Barron on the way back from the abortion clinic on Friday, And some will probably send emails or text messages or make phone calls, say, Father, you shouldn't do this. But I had my headset on, my motorcycle. It's built into my motorcycle helmet. It's Bluetooth connected. And I wanted to listen to something like that on the way back from the abortion clinic because there was probably almost 1,000 people there, I would imagine, at the clinic on Friday with the bishop and many priests and many religious brothers and sisters, and lots of lay folks praying for life. Even kids were there. When I was coming back listening to Bishop Barron reflect on the Stations of the Cross, he talked about Jesus in the tomb and how they had sent a guard to make sure no one broke in. And Fulton Sheen recalls that this is the only time a guard was set over the body of a dead man to make sure he didn't rise from the dead. It's just almost ridiculous. But Jesus' enemies coaxed Pontius Pilate to send this detachment of guards over there to guard the tomb. To guard the tomb. Now, the only tomb that I've ever seen guarded before was the tomb of the unknown soldier in Washington, D.C. Maybe you've seen it too. It's a very surreal kind of experience to go there. See, the tomb of the unknown soldier is someone who died in battle whom we do not know, buried there in Arlington Cemetery. Oddly enough, that cemetery belonged to Robert E. Lee before the Civil War. And he was pushed out of there by the North, and it was used as a operational post. And then, after the war, it was not returned to him. The good news is it became this cemetery for those who have died serving their country. And so the tomb is dedicated to those who have lost their lives protecting this country, even those whom we can't identify. So the tomb of the unknown soldier is there with guards posted. Why? Well, to show respect for the dead, to protect the tomb from being defaced, and to honor those who have died for our country. Now, when you go through the cemetery and walking through those thousands of gravestones on the roadway there, oftentimes people chat. But when they arrive at the tomb of the unknown soldier, silence prevails. It's almost a jaw-dropping silence. And you see the guard there, and he marches in lockstep in absolute silence. Now, I haven't been there when anybody has been chatty, but there are videos on YouTube when people just can't seem to shut up and respect the dead. They are corrected sternly by those soldiers, by those Marines. And I think to myself, yeah, he's carrying a rifle. You just need to shut up. Guarding the tomb, the unknown soldier, silence. Jesus was maybe an unknown soldier to those who received the message after the resurrection, but he really isn't an unknown soldier. And regardless of those guards there, he broke out. He broke out in silence. The unknown soldier is really known as Jesus Christ in this regard. He breaks out. And it's not, there are some that say, well, the message of the resurrection really isn't that he rose from the dead. It's that his cause went on. No, He broke out of the tomb in order to break into our lives. He broke out of the tomb so that he can break into whatever keeps us from the love of God. I saw, many Clint Eastwood movies, but one, Hang 'em High. Clint Eastwood is a marshal. He goes out rounding up the bad guys, puts them in the prison wagon with the bars and everything, And then that wagon carries them to their ultimate destiny, because he's working for a hanging judge. The judge has very little mercy, very little mercy. And they're in that wagon knowing what's going to happen. They're heading for their ultimate destiny. Jesus Christ breaks into the prison wagon that contains us. Listen to these words from The Exalted that we sang last night right here, that Father Shea chanted last night right here, with the Paschal candle burning, with the place alight with our handheld candles. Jesus Christ broke the prison bars of death. We're in this prison wagon. And the wagon is sin. And it's carrying us to our ultimate end. Our end is death. Our end is hell. He breaks into that prison wagon. He breaks the bars. Breaks into our lives to set us free. Free from what? From the bondage of that sin and death that leads to hell. Brothers and sisters, Jesus Christ is risen. He is risen indeed.